cherry tree. A lot of things changed in that small seashell of a town the day they chopped down the cherry tree. And sometimes after, I couldn't recall if it had been dead for years and months or just mere minutes. But it was so clear that among the things that changed was my tender and sweet grandmother. She was good fun, but she hid things. All those days back then seemed to curl around each other, blending into a tightly bound yarn that we used to warm our hands during these winter winds. And it was hard to determine exactly when I became aware of the cherry tree, but I knew it started one freezing winter day. We packed up early in the morning, before we could even find our noses. My brother and I were going in and out of our coma of sleep. Dad came in, shaking us in our bed of the night. "Hey boys, hey, let's go," he'd say. Unable to even form any sentences, we defaulted to muttering and motions, pushing him away with clammy hands and gibberish. "Come on, get up. We're going to Grandma's house. Now get going," he rallied us on. "Grammy's," my brother lazily yawned out. "Yeah, car's already running. 5 minutes," he said. "We'll get breakfast on the way." My dad left the room, clomping around with those big galoshes he wore everywhere. So much I used to think that they were part of his feet. My brother tossed from side to side, finally mustering the energy to get up. He tried to wake me, but I was dead to the world. I lay there motionless until he jumped on top of me. Right on my stomach, I doubled over in pain, coughing. "Maddie, that hurt. Why'd you do that?" I screamed at him. He just smiled and beamed at me. "We're going to Grandma's," he replied with exuberance, and then sadly, "I'm sorry about your tummy." He stood above me, holding out his hand. I was reluctant at first, but finally conceded. He lifted me up to my feet. In the excitement of the early morning, we started to dress. Haphazardly, we threw on whatever we could find in that dim-lit room. The only light came from a single lamp. All ready to take on the day, we thumped down the stairs and out through the front door. Climbing in the car, we buckled up and set off into that bleak, cruel morning of our youth. It was a long, stifling drive along those country roads. The car trucked through slush and snow. As more came down, the wipers slashed back and forth like bat wings in a shallow cave. A sort of misfit soundtrack of the early morning drowsiness and sleep deprivation we all felt. Maddie and I were in the back seat, fastened tight and shivering uncontrollably. Mom turned around and saw how cold we were. "Just give it a little time, boys," she said. "It's an old car." I wanted to argue with Mom, but I knew what that conversation looked like, so I said, "Okay," and turned towards the window, looking out. I watched the snow fall onto the treetops and stones in the field, beyond the distant wire fences that kept the cows from roaming. Snow lay in heaps and clumps along the roadside like puffy pillows on an Arabic circular bed. I felt the growing coolness on my temple exuding from the window. I looked over at my brother, who had fallen back asleep. Lucky kid. My parents were having a hushed conversation, something barely audible. I looked over at the window again. I started to feel the heat finally, so I began to curl up by the window, arranging myself in a comfortable position. As I closed my eyes, I heard the muffled sound of my parents' voices. They sounded miles away, which was comforting. I felt myself drifting away. Before I opened my eyelids, I heard fragments of conversation in the car. I knew my brother was near because his voice echoed loudly in that tight space. As my eyelids flittered and twitched open, I saw my mother in front of me, smiling and looking at me. "You boys could sleep through anything," she said. "A thunderstorm couldn't wake you." My dad released a hearty chuckle from up front, slapping the center console. "Oh, you have no reason to laugh. You're exactly the same," Mom retorted. I saw that we weren't that far from Grandma's house. I remembered taking this drive before, so I thought I knew where we were. I straightened myself in my seat, looking at my brother, who was watching the tiny buildings of that sleepy town whiz past him. I knew we were only 2 towns away, and the sky began to drift from midnight black to a lighter hue of pinkish blue. He looked back at me, and we exchanged an unspoken sentiment. We loved going to Grandma's house. There was so much to do for boys growing up. My grandfather took my brother to go shoot one of the plethora of guns he kept, or with my dad in tow, they'd go fishing in some nearby lake. My brother just loved everything about being outdoors, the adventure, the thrill of the hunt, and finally, the prize to be taken home. He even enjoyed setting up a camp, living like that in nature. I really think he enjoyed that, to be away from it all. It was different with me. I usually stayed back in the house with Grandma. I would watch her bake cookies or bread. That was her domain, in the kitchen. And she would spend countless hours in that tiny, unsightly kitchen doing this and that, and sometimes I would sit there with her as she did her things, but mostly I was in the other room reading a book or watching some videos she put on for me. But what I really loved the most was when we would take walks along the wooded paths through the woods. We'd gingerly stroll on the leaves beneath our feet, noticing everything around us, the smell of the mulchy leaves and branches that had been sweltering in the sun, the unsteady wind picking up debris of the floor, whirling it around like some kind of makeshift miniature tornado. The talking trees swaying back and forth, almost obstructing our walkway at times. The buzzing sound of bees around the honeycomb straight above our heads. I was always frightened of bees, so Grandma kept me safe. It was on one of those walks that I first saw the cherry tree. It was in the middle of autumn this time. We were coming back from the forest by the path along the river, and suddenly I saw it off in the distance. It was all alone in the path, in the center of the path. All the leaves and cherries had fallen off, but still the tree held its magnificence. It radiated in that dusky, dim light of September as a guiding force for weary travelers. There seemed to be something magical about this tree. It talked to me, pulling me to it, like it was a guardian or a gatekeeper of the forest and its secrets, and I knew that there was a pact it was attempting to communicate to me, but I didn't understand it then, not yet. I remember that I'd read a book about fairies. I hoped that maybe this was the home of the fairies, and but that was silly at the time. When we approached it, my grandma grabbed my hand as we stared at it. "Do you like my new tree?" she said. "Grandpa just picked it up." "I do, Grammy. Is it sick?" I fervently asked. "No, darlin'. She grew some beautiful fruit, but it all has been picked off or fell off. Now it's the time of year where she goes to sleep and rest till the spring. Don't worry. She's good and strong." "The tree is a she?" I asked. "Yes. How else would she be able to grow fruit? Those are her babies, just like you were your mom's baby," she said. "Oh, I see," I replied. I could start to feel the wind pick up, and already the light that lay over the country sky was beginning to dwindle into a molten orange. Just beyond the tree was a sloping hill that emptied into a shallow river. It was shallow and then at times could be very deep, but right now it was shallow, and you could see the reeds pendulate stuck between little stones and clay, and ripping from the trees were the martins and the swallows like bats out of a cave, with no aim or purpose. The swallows just flew around in circles, but the martins would swoop down into the river and feed, opening their tiny beaks to grab the insects that lay on the surface of the water, to soar back up and feast. It began to get darker, and our path was becoming less visible. "Let's go back up to the house," Grandma said. "We'll have some supper." "Okay, Grammy," I replied. So we walked back to the house. Lighting our way was a singular light by the front doorstep that shone so bright. And as we neared the steps, we began to stomp our feet on the concrete, discarding all the grass and dirt from the bottom of our shoes. We opened the door and took off our shoes and sat down at the table. I never spoke to my brother about that day in the cherry tree. We didn't go to Grandma's house as much during the school year as we did in the summer. We would sometimes spend weeks at a time out there in June or July. It was our kingdom away from responsibilities and rules, where we could stay up late and watch westerns with Grandpa, and Grandma would feed us like kings that we thought we were. So we'd forget about our kingdom during the year, and soon as summer came, we were begging our parents to go back there, each for his own reasons. Matty came to see the cherry tree, but he didn't know about it. Not like I did. It's been a long time since I thought about that cherry tree, and the cottage house that hid between the rolling fields, among the dusty one-way roads that swirled along those sleepy country years. The martins and the swallows diving through brush and weeds, coasting on sparkling water to engulf those little flies that made their homes on the water's surface. Or the dark enchanting woods that were not far off, just a walk away, filled with the sounds and colors of autumn. And sometimes I miss how carefree everything was back then. No bills or appointments, alarm clocks, or frustrations to weigh you down. I always wake up violently, in the grips of some wrestling match that I've lost, leaving me disoriented and screaming like a maniac, realizing it's just me in the bed, and shuffle off towards the kitchen. I flip on the coffee pot and go into the bathroom, performing all the necessary tasks to get on with my day. From the back room, I can hear my cell phone going off, ringing. I try to ignore it at first, thinking, who could be calling me at this hour in the morning, and what do they want? It keeps ringing. So I shut off my toothbrush, toss it into my bag, and march out, bracing myself for some horrendous nuisance that I have to deal with at 9 a.m. I grab my phone, look at it, and it says Mom. Why does she always have to call so early? I could just call her back later. Fuck. I'll forget. Hi, Mom. Can you hold on for a second, I say? Sure, she replies. I set the phone down on the bed and gingerly stride into the kitchen. Pulling open the cabinet door, I grab a cup and pour myself a hefty amount. I open the fridge, trying to locate the milk, but can't find any. Slamming the door in anger, I grab the cup and walk out into the main room. Picking up the phone, and I walk outside. Sitting down on the bench outside my apartment. It's a clear Los Angeles day, about 85 degrees and almost perfect as far as days go, but it's early and I'm in one of my regular moods, not wanting to be bothered at this point in the day, but it's Mom, so I answer it. Mom, I'm back, sorry. You just wake up, she says. For some reason, she can always tell when I just woke up. It's like one of her superpowers or something, no matter how hard I try and hide it. Even if I was just brushing my teeth or jumping out of an airplane, she'd say, "You sound tired.